hit record, we'll post all of these to Canvas, so you'll have this and all the slide decks to reference. All right, let me share my screen. We'll get going. Cool. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Fantastic. All right. Well, as the slide title says, welcome to UX Virtual. I am super excited that you're going to be with me for UX Virtual. Yesterday, I met your UI virtual counterparts. I'm also teaching the UI track. So I think it's going to be really cool to be able to see the growth of the UX and UI team into the immersion phase. So here's the agenda that we're going to go over. We're going to have a time of introductions where I just, I want to hear about you, what brought you here, what you plan to do after designation. Then we're going to do a bit of orientation. Try not to repeat everything that's in Canvas, but I do want to hit some of the highlights for the program overview, and also just give you a chance to ask questions, because I'm sure you've read the syllabus, you've read it's quite a bit of information to get through about the program in Canvas. So want to make sure that we're all on the same page and you're clear on what needs to happen going forward. Then I'm going to introduce our project prompt. This is going to be the project you're working on throughout the 6 weeks. Each team will create a product that they will need to deliver at the end of the 6 weeks. So I'm going to talk a bit about that. And then, since one of the first things you're doing is you're gathering data via subject matter expert and stakeholder interviews, you're going to be going into user interviews. I want to pause and spend a bit of time talking about what good interviewing is like and what you're supposed to do with these interview results. It's not an entirely intuitive process, so we'll talk a good bit about that. You're going to be doing interviewing throughout your career as designers, so we want to set a good foundation there. And then we'll talk about your research plans. So I'm asking each team for, if one person will please share their screen and just kind of walk us through the research plan. And we want to just make sure that we are all aligned around the content of the research plans and how we're going to use those as sort of an alignment document throughout the entire 6 weeks. So a little bit about me. I'm not super interesting, but I do have a varied background in music and publishing and event design. I worked for the past 5 years. I've been at an ad technology company here in Chicago called Centro, and we work on software, web software that allows agencies to plan, buy, execute, and optimize advertising campaigns. So it's a huge, kind of complex, interesting area to work in. So while I was working at Centro, I've also had a great relationship with Designation for the past 5 years. Like Dina, I did go through the program when it was in its beta. So I like to say that we beta tested Designation. And yes, and then joined Centro after leaving Designation. But I've had a relationship there for at least 5 years, doing lectures, coaching, mentoring, curriculum, all kind of different things. Just recently, I joined Flatiron as the lead instructor of design. So you all are actually my first cohort where I am your lead instructor, although that's not technically true, because I've been the lead instructor for UX along with Dina and a couple of other people for the past year. But with the Flatiron and WeWork acquisition, some things got shuffled around. And so now I'm the lead instructor for the virtual phase for UI and UX. I have my availability on here. This isn't like set in stone in terms of the 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. Monday through Friday. It's just the time that I set aside for you to be able to book. But if that time doesn't work for you, like, we'll work something out. So you can Slack me if you need to set up a meeting outside of that time, and I'll open up some availability. But that's just the time when I'm probably most focused on student meetings between 9 and 11 a.m. Like all Flatiron staff, we are not available on the weekends or after the working day ends. So just know, if you Slack us a message at 10 p.m. on Saturday, we're probably not going to answer you until Monday. Again, if I see the message on my phone, I might shoot you an answer. But by and large, we just ask that you be respectful of the staff availability and the turnaround time for communication. We try to do our best and try to always get you the answers that you need. All right, and then I will kick it over to Dina, kind of give some of her background.
Hey guys, as Joshua mentioned, I am also a designation graduate. In fact, we were in the same cohort together way back a whole alphabet ago. We were in the Diamond cohort. Before I did designation, I worked in journalism and communications and organizing. I was a communications person for a union for a long time, which is actually how I got into this. I just kind of ended up with the design jobs on the team because I happened to be the youngest person there and I was interested in helping to run their website and social media presence. And that was what kind of gave me the idea to learn it in a more organized way rather than just Googling my way through stuff that I couldn't figure out. Since designation, I've worked in ed tech and data science, but right now I'm doing this and I do freelance web design and consulting and a lot of freelance photography. So my schedule is actually pretty flexible. I'm usually somewhere near a machine that has Slack on it. If you have any questions, I can probably work you up an answer. And my job differs from Joshua's in that he is going to do the lecturing and I give the written critique. So as you have noticed, because I've already critiqued your first two things, this is Scarf, he's annoying. But anyway, yeah, so I'm the person who writes the feedback on the stuff that you turn in. So if you ever have any questions about what I've written in there or are unclear on any of the parameters for the deliverables, just let me know.
All right. Now it's your turn to unmute the mics and tell us about who you are, what brought you here, what you were doing before designation. Love to hear about, your interests about design. If you have some ideas about what you want to do after the program or, sectors that you'd like to go into, I'd be interested to hear about that. And then one strength or one weakness that you've seen in your work so far in Design Essentials. So whoever wants to jump in and go first.
All right, I guess I'll go. My name is Vu. I came through designation because I did a lot of research. I've had colleagues and friends in the past. They went through the General Assembly in San Francisco and told me mixed things about that program. One of them has a job and the other two don't. So I just kind of thought about it as a process of I don't think someone can become a proficient UX designer and I think it's 10 weeks they do. So I was like, why not just up the ante to 24? And then on top of that, I used to work for a startup tech company that specialized in healthcare technology on the account management, client support side. So I kind of got exposed to the product side of a tech company. So that's kind of how I started my foray into UX design and getting interested in the field. And so then I quit my job my job in LA back in October of 2017, I think. Yeah. And then I started taking classes while working at a local community college in LA in HTML, graphic design, and basically classes that I thought would prepare me for UX design and UI design down the road. What I hope to get out of this program is to learn to be a really good UX designer. I'm sure everyone else is, but just learn to be a good UX designer and be able to actually land a job in the field. Yeah, I think that's it, right?
Sorry about that.
Oh, one strength and weakness.
Yeah.
Oh, and DE, I guess the strength side is definitely probably the research side because that's kind of what I did in undergrad was I come from a liberal arts background, international relations major, so I'm used to writing lots of papers and stuff and doing interviews with people, conducting field research. But weakness was definitely the wireframes portion. Kind of struggled with that a little bit, but yeah, hoping to learn more since we're doing a deeper dive in the virtual segment of the program.
Nice. Yes, you will do many wireframes.
Yeah.
All right. Nice to meet you, Vu.
Thanks. Likewise.
It's Vu like the soft U, or is it View?
It's just vu, like how French people say it, like vu.
Ah, got it.
Yeah.
Cool.
I'll go next. No one else wants to go. So I'm Sarah. I found designation, unfortunately, through targeted ads, I'm pretty sure. But I had been looking at different UX programs, and like Vu, I was looking at General Assembly, and I did not really get a good vibe when it came to post-program, where they ended up. They weren't very forthcoming about job placement and stuff. So I have a good friend who lives in Chicago, and I guess through my internet history, I was getting on Facebook stuff from Designation. So I looked it up a little bit, and I liked that it was a longer program. The brevity of other programs were kind of iffy to me, and so I liked the different phases that Designation had. What interests me most about design? I guess it's just that human behavior can be so condensed into almost a science that you know how to be laying things out, because even though we're all so different, we have very basic and similar mindsets and perspectives when it comes to certain things. What do I hope to do after this program? Be employed, first off. I did graphic design, and I wanted to do something a little more, that's something that still had creativity in it, but also a little more techie-ish, which is why I thought UX was a pretty good match. So I'm hoping after the program to find a job that kind of employs both sides of the brains, where I'm able to be more creative and also be in like a group atmosphere and be like building something. One strength and weakness I've seen in my work. So a strength is, I think I have like a good aesthetic eye when it comes to certain things, which is of course because I had background with graphic design. Although I did major in international relations like Vu. That worked out for us. Weakness is, I think sometimes I can get a little too broad thinking, that I'm looking at too much of the big picture, that I'm missing finer details. That's what I'll say.
Gotcha. All right, thanks, Sarah. Nice to meet you.
Me too.
Who's next?
I can go. I'm Deborah. Before Designation, I was a video and photographer producer. So I like a year and a half ago, like 2 years ago, heard about Designation, and I knew I wanted to get out of the production field, and actually one of my coworkers had said, hey, maybe this would be interesting to you. So it's a whole different career shift for me. But I've always been interested in design. I've always been interested in visuals and how people interact with things. I'm really interested in, especially with DE. It was really fascinating. I hope to just learn as much as I can through this program. Initially coming into it, I thought that maybe I would be more interested in the UI, but UX seemed to be a lot more like, I was interested in the behaviors and stuff like that. My strengths and weaknesses, I mean, I think the research part is a bit of a struggle for me, because overarching, like Sarah was saying, she's good at overarching. I'm like pretty specific, and I feel like that could really pigeonhole some of my thoughts and research. Strengths, I think, like I enjoy doing the wireframing and prototyping. I enjoy like all that kind of stuff, and I love ideating. So I think that could be a strength, that I am willing to ideate. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, nice to meet you, Deborah.
So next, I'm Janie. What brought me to designation is kind of similar to other folks, was looking at different programs. And at first was actually going to do just a strictly online program, but then in doing more research, found designation and realized it'd be really great to have the in-person client phase. I thought that that would be a real asset. And what interests me the most about design, I'm really drawn to the idea of needing empathy and kind of empathizing with the user on the other end. My background's in education, so I was a teacher for a little bit, and then most recently I was doing research for a think tank focused on education policy, and so doing research and writing related to that. And I think there's a lot of transferable things with that. Just thinking about like how to chunk information, how to use visual cues, all the kind of like cognitive science stuff is really interesting to me about how people learn something or perceive something well. After the program, hope to be employed, like others have said. And I'm based in Baltimore, so hoping to get a job in the Baltimore area. I'm pretty rooted here. And if there was some sort of like public sector, public interest component to it, that would be really awesome, but open to whatever is out there. And one strength, I think, is coming from the research background that I have. I think that's a strength for me. And one weakness, I would say, is probably like the visual design aesthetic part, just because I don't have as much of a background in that. And so I feel kind of intimidated about making a design and knowing if it just looks pretty to me or does it look pretty to other people. So yeah, that's something I hope. I know I'm in the UX track, but hoping to also grow in the UI visual component too.
Yeah, I love UX designers going into the public sector or government or service, nonprofit. We need, we need good designers there. So that's good to hear. Nice to meet you, Janie. All right. Sergey, I think you're up.
Sorry, guys, I didn't realize I was the last one. My name is Sergey. It's fine if you guys get my name wrong. That's all right. It happens often, so I'm used to it. So what brought me to designation? Actually, a former mentor at designation introduced me to the program. Prior to designation, I worked as a product design engineer, and I just felt like the engineering field wasn't the right field for me. I've enjoyed the designing aspect of what I did, but engineering didn't excite me too much. So I started thinking about where I want to be in the next 5 years, and I just wanted to move away from the field in general. So through a good friend of mine, I was introduced to a UX designer who just kind of gave me a good understanding of the field, and then ultimately kind of nudged me to think about joining designation. So that's kind of how I got here. What interests me most about the design, I think just the amount of things that you could actually be doing within the field, just the broad scope of creativity that's involved with design. So I think there's a lot that you could do, a lot of different areas that you could focus in on. And also this program, I'm hoping to obviously get a job, but I would love to work for a company that focuses on interior designing or furniture, just because that's where my passion is. I've had previous experience with doing designing for interior stuff, doing some remodeling. My family's also in the construction business, so I'm kind of aware of that field. So just kind of aligning that with my passions would be great to kind of apply my knowledge from this program and be able to work alongside the people who are doing something similar to that. And I think for my strength, I'm very detail-oriented, I think, and I think at the same time that could be a bad thing because I'll overthink the different aspects of what we did in DE, especially during the research part, just the structuring and wording correctly things. I think I spent more time than I should have, but it was good experience that I'm hoping just kind of push myself to not spend a lot of time on the small details at times. So.
Cool. Nice to meet you, Sergey.
You too.
All right. I love hearing about all of your backgrounds. Thank you for sharing those details. I think, your own personal story as you go through this program is going to be important to incorporate into, things like your portfolios, your case studies. You'll definitely develop, a sense of working style. And so I think that we see obviously a lot of people with varied backgrounds come through this program. And it's just cool to kind of hear the backstory of what brought you all here. So I look forward to getting to know you even further. And it's also, once you go through the program, it's like you can't not see things through the design lens. So being able to apply your skills in all kind of different sectors, like Sergey said, you can broadly go to a lot of different places through UX design, and there's almost no place that that design can't enhance or touch or strengthen. So yeah, it's definitely been my experience too. All right. So from a high level, I just wanted to touch on these goals, talk about them at the beginning so that it gives us a way to sort of self-assess at the end of the program. Did we attain these goals? Do you feel prepared for the next phase? So, preparing you for the in-person experience is definitely high on our goal list. Ramping up in terms of the dedication and the time, the effort, the standards that Dina and I are going to hold you to are definitely going to be higher than what you experienced in Design Essentials. You're not going to walk away doing everything perfectly or executing everything perfectly. So I want to go ahead and give you permission to learn right through this program, and not just expect that you're going to walk away with these highly polished, amazing artifacts, because that's not really the point of the virtual phase. We're trying to get you familiar with some of the methods and techniques that UX designers use in their research and their design, so that when you do make it to the immersion and the client phase and your first job, you'll have had that kind of experience of already having done this a little bit. And each time you go through this UX lifecycle process with a new product or a new feature or a new client, you're going to get more and more familiar with it. So, we are preparing you for real world jobs. The kind of work that we're asking you to do in UX Virtual is the same kind of work that I've done for the past 5 years at Centro and Dina's done for her job. So, there's not necessarily a real ramp up, we're kind of throwing you into the deep end here, but obviously you've got some coaches on your side. So the higher demands on time, engagement, and quality of work will help prepare you for the in-person experience. We definitely want to give you experience working on a team. If you've not worked on a team on a project like this before, then sometimes that can actually be the most difficult part of going through UX Virtual or going through designation in general. It just requires a certain set of soft skills, I think, to be able to effectively work on a design project in a team. So much like preparing you for the in-person experience, by forcing you to do this project in a team setting, you're going to start to wrestle with some of the things that creative teams wrestle with in the real world. So how to time box yourselves, how to prioritize your time, how to make decisions and keep the design ball pushed up the hill, to the next step. Using healthy conflict. This is not, unless you've worked in a, dysfunctional or a really functional team before, you probably, don't know that you can actually use conflict in a way that moves the project forward. So, we'll be talking a little bit more about that later on, but, do expect that there might be some times of frustration with your teammates. They might be frustrated with you. But just remember, it's about the project, it's about the work, right? And we're going to use that to center ourselves as a team and to push the project forward, okay? But Dina and I will be there to help you through any hard points there. So a lot of design comes down to critical thinking and good judgment, right? Design is just making decisions. It is all about trying to reach a threshold of confidence so that you can make a decision. So when I say make a decision, I mean it could be which method do you need to use to do the research? What do we do with the data? Who do we communicate the results of our findings to? How do we use that to make decisions, right? So it's all about engaging like the critical thinking mindset so that we can broaden our knowledge of different models and research and testing. But we don't want to stay too sort of abstract and theoretical and philosophical. We also want to make sure that we are zooming down or zooming into the more pragmatic hands-on level, and that you are getting personal hands-on experience with all of these methods, but that you also go in to the methods understanding from a high level, what the goals are for engaging with them. I guess I put experience working on a design team twice because it's just that important. It can be the most rewarding and the most frustrating part of going through the designation experience. All right, so the classes. So obviously we're in our first one, so good job. You passed the first test of showing up for the first class. Now just do that 11 more times, okay? Tuesdays and Fridays are gonna be our class time from 2 to 4 p.m. That time, we'll always start at 2, so please be prompted on time, but we may end a little bit early depending on how much we have to get done. Every now and then, if we're in a really good discussion or a good critique, that may stray over to the 2.5-hour mark. So it does happen sometimes, but I do try to make sure that we keep to the 2 to 4 p.m. schedule as much as possible. The Zoom link should not change from class to class. Hopefully we won't have the same problem each time that we had getting into the Zoom hall. As far as my expectations for you as designers, I do expect you to attend all the classes. I know Design Essentials was a lot more lax about that. You didn't necessarily have to show up for every class or every critique. But I expect you to be there. You're paying a lot of money to go through this program, and I don't want to pass you to my fellow instructors and leaders in the immersion phase if I don't have the confidence that you can execute there. So you have to be in class and you have to be engaging with the discussions and with the critiques in order to grow, to be able to gain those skills that you need to take it to the next level. Obviously, I'm not going to be a super hard ass if something comes up like you have to have major surgery. Things come up, life happens. So absolutely, if you need to miss one class due to something extremely important, please just reach out to Dina and I, 24 hours before the class and let us know that you won't be there. That way, we'll know that you can watch the lecture, the recorded lecture later on. Just as important as being in the class is actually being engaged with the class. We're small enough that I'm probably going to call you out if I see that you're not really participating, if I see that your camera is off, like for half the class. I just, when it's like 25 people, it's harder, obviously, to keep everyone engaged and to keep an eye on everything. But when it's 5, like, there's no reason why we can't be involved in like robust discussions and critiques. So, I am considering engagement a part of my, assessment. And then in terms of being prepared, there's a lot of reading in Canvas. Like you probably already can tell, there's a ton of reading. So I just want to give you a caveat to all of the reading. Not all of it is as important to get through as some of the other ones. So, week to week, I may point out a couple of like really important things that I want you to read before class, but I'll let you know ahead of time. Practice now as designers. We always want to like learn all of the things, and we think that if we miss something, that sort of fear of missing out, right? We worried we're not going to be able to come back to it. We're not going to learn it. take some of these longer articles, these longer chapters, and skim, right? Pull out the most important chunks. You know, give yourself, say, I'm going to take 15 minutes and I'm going to go through this chapter and I'm going to pull out the most important headlines or key summaries, things like that. Like, to me, that's a more valuable use of your time. If you can do that, you can get the essence of it. So I think that the designers that know how to do that, know how to summarize, know how to like get the meat of an article out of it, the takeaways, you know, tend to do the best. So don't get overwhelmed thinking you have to make it through every single piece of reading in there, okay? And then the classes, like I say, it's gonna be a mix of lecture, discussion, critique, and workshops. We're gonna kind of just go back and forth between those. I try to keep any lectures to like no more than 20 minutes, or at least like I would chunk it into different parts. By and large, I want to focus on more workshop-y things with discussions and critiques, okay? In addition to the classes, since we are small, I want to meet with each of you one-on-one every week. So there's only 5 of you, right? So I'm just gonna send you the meeting invite, and if the time just doesn't work for you week to week, then you let me know and I'll shift it around, okay? But I'm just gonna, you know, wanna spend 15, 30 minutes. There's nothing that you need to prepare for those meetings. I'm not gonna have a preset template of questions to discuss. I just want it to be very personal, one-on-one, talking about your goals, your process, any struggles that you're having. If I can give you some guidance or coaching, if I can help with any team issues or conflict, you know, we can talk about it there. It's no problem, okay? Additionally, I'm gonna ask you to do a little bit of journaling, right? So think back to your high school days and your journal under the bed, and let's channel that. It's actually a really good habit to get into, I think, you know, just in life in general, but as designers, being reflective about your process through this program will really help you. Practically, it's gonna help you write great case studies later on when you're doing the portfolio, right? Because you can't remember everything. And the case studies that you're gonna be creating are pretty damn in-depth. Like, there's several pages long. Like, I've seen students coming out or designers coming out with case studies that were like 10, 12 pages long. So having that journal to look back on and prompt you to remember like the major decisions and milestones are about your process. One thing you're gonna learn is that these case studies are heavy on the process. Good recruiters want to understand the critical thinking, the you know, the decision points, the important takeaways from your process. So I think it's a good exercise to have. So we're just gonna ask that you submit those by Sunday or by Sunday night. And again, it's just a weekly reflection on the process and your major decisions. I think, Dina, you might have some prompts too to give them, is that right? Or are we just gonna let them open it up?
Yeah, I think every week it's like, what did you like the best? What did you struggle with? How would you rate the program so far? That's pretty much it. This is also an opportunity if you have any issues that you, for some reason, feel weird about saying on Slack, this is another good place to put them. We try to open up a lot of channels for folks to express whatever they need to express without requiring that you be an extrovert to do it. So yeah, you know, you can kind of make of it what you want. If there's other stuff you'd like to write about in there, I'm happy to read it. The prompts are pretty simple though.
Yeah, use the prompts as, you know, your guidance, but I would love for you to reflect, you know, have a section of reflection on your process and any major decisions too, because we want to be able to look back on those. And Dina and I are the only people that read those, so those don't get shared.
Just a quick question on that is, where should we be submitting those? Like, I don't, maybe I'm missing it, but I don't see it in the assignments.
I believe it's a regular old assignment on Canvas. It's possible that it just isn't visible to you yet. We make those assignments only open for a little while because otherwise we were having a problem where people would like get to the next week, be like, oh, I forgot to reflect on the last week, and then would try and go back and like put it back togetger when it kind of just made more sense for them to move on.
Got it.
I
do see it, so.
Oh, great. All right, cool.
Yeah. Thank you.
Cool. Okay, grades. You know, most important thing about them is the discussion, the dialogue, and the feedback that happens around your artifacts. So I want you to focus first and foremost on the feedback that you're getting from Dina and the feedback you're getting from me, all right? And focus on the iteration, okay? Don't focus on the complete incomplete. We found that when we gave grades that were more granular or that were on a scale, there was so much focus on how can I get from a 0.25 to a 1.5 or whatever that it was kind of a waste of time. So if it's incomplete, if you receive an incomplete, it doesn't mean you did a bad job. It just means there's something else that we want to teach you about that particular assignment, okay? So when you get the incomplete, and most of you will get incompletes the first time you turn things in, like you just will, and that's not a problem. Incomplete just means you need to iterate on it, incorporate the feedback, and then resubmit the assignment. Did you want to say something?
The main reasons that I would give people incompletes are, number one, it's just a thing that takes a lot of iterations. Like the problem statements and design principles, always, like every single team I've ever had has gone through many drafts of that. It doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It just takes some workshopping. Number two, there's some kind of assumption in there that I'm worried that if you proceed hanging on to that assumption, that it will mess up your work in the future. And then number three, sometimes people just don't read the checklist of assignment requirements thoroughly enough and just blow past something that you were supposed to put in there.
Okay, Dina froze. Sorry, Dina. Your face is in a funny position, but when you come back, do you have anything?
Did you, or just weird face?
Still the weird face, and your audio is cutting
Hello?
in out. Oh, there, now you're kind of moving.
Oh.
Sorry, maybe your cat is chewing through your internet wire.
It could be.
I think you're back now. Was there anything else you wanted to say?
Now I'm on mute. Cool. Basically what I said was half the time you get an incomplete, it's because you just didn't read thoroughly enough and just skipped something. So one good idea would be to make a to-do list of all the stuff in the assignment requirements section on Canvas and just make sure you hit all of those. If it isn't that, sometimes it's that I need to correct an assumption you've made so that whatever you have done wrong now doesn't affect your work later, since all these assignments build on each other. So basically what Josh was saying, don't feel too bad if you get an incomplete. It doesn't mean you're failing. It just means you need to workshop it.
Yep. For the submission, just calling out there, most of the time it's just Google Doc link in Canvas, and we're going to try to comment directly on the page. Make sure wherever you're storing that in Google Drive that we have access do we have to have access as editors to be able to comment on it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so just make sure we have access to the drive where the documents are, because rather than just giving you like paragraphs of feedback, it's easier if we can be more targeted in the documents, okay? And we'll put comments on there. We'll use InVision for most of the visual artifacts, because in the same way we do comments on your documents, we can also put little comments here and there on your artifacts, okay? I have to stop at this point and ask, Vu, are you sitting on a roof?
So yeah, crazy thing, I was actually doing my SME interview at this public library, like by where I live, like literally like a minute before this class. And they don't have any study rooms in here, so like the only place I could do it is like this outside area. It's like a brick wall.
Oh, hey, you've identified a user need.
Yeah.
Indoor space.
Yeah, now that you say it, does look like I'm sitting on a roof and trying not to fall off.
It did. I wondered if there was like floodwaters rising around you or something. And
there's only like a wooden table that's like way too low, so that's why it looks like I'm like standing over my video. So, it's all right. It's working.
All right, cool. Okay, so for the tools you're going to be using through the program, heavy reliance on Sketch. Sketch is just, I think, the industry standard now. Slowly starting to be challenged by tools like Adobe XD, other wireframing tools. Figma is on the rise, but in our research and assessment, Sketch still remains the industry standard for creating wireframes. It now has some nice, very light prototyping functionality in there. So Sketch is great for just creating quick wireframes and then linking the screens together and then quick testing, right? So if you needed more in-depth testing, you might move to InVision. InVision is highly collaborative, and in the same way, like I mentioned with Google Docs, we can leave comments on there. You can resolve comments. You can create inspiration and style tiles. And then it has some nice developer handoff functionality where it will generate some of the CSS and HTML from your designs. So I think you get a whole year of InVision for free, which is a pretty big deal. So make sure that you get in there early and you are getting used to the functionality there. So Axure there, again, Axure is just, the student version is free. Axure is definitely like the workhorse of the UX world. And it can do so much. If you've ever used Photoshop before, then you're gonna understand like the complexity that Axure can offer if you want it. My hope with Axure in this program is that it will require you to make some important judgment calls about interaction. So when we get into the later stages of creating the wireframes and prototypes, you're gonna need to start thinking about the different ways that your product is gonna be interacted with, micro interactions, some of the prototyping logic you will probably wrestle with. So it's a great tool to get to know. You won't leave being an expert at Axure. I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination at Axure, but it's great to be able to have in your toolkit. And a lot of the principles you learn in Axure can be applied to other prototyping tools, okay? Any issues getting Sketch, InVision, or Axure so far? Has everyone at least downloaded them? And yeah? Okay, great. If you run into any issues, let me know. All right, so a big part of our time together is going to be spent on critique. I believe you did a little bit of critique in Design Essentials. They can be challenging. Imposter syndrome often pops up in our minds, and we don't want to offer or express an opinion because we think we aren't informed. But I just, I want to say at the top here that you're all designers. You've made it through Design Essentials, and I consider you designers, and I consider you to be informed, and I think you all have opinions that are valid. So we want to make sure that we're engaging in good, healthy discussion and critique. So here's kind of a framework that I like to use for our critiques, because otherwise it turns into kind of this subjective feeling, I like, I don't like, sort of mentality. So we want to be really intentional about how we run these critiques. And the first thing is to make sure that we're prepared. When you are presenting your deliverables for critique, it's nice to not have distractions. So that's why I have this requirement that anything that you're showing, any artifact that you're showing, not necessarily like the research plan, you can show that in Google Docs. But if you're showing designs or journey maps or any of those artifacts, put them in InVision. Because what's nice about InVision is we focus on one screen at a time, versus if you had Sketch open, you're gonna be scrolling around to find the right place. We're gonna see your layers and the editors. So we wanna really hone in and focus on the things that matter. So that's why I ask that you put them in InVision, okay? When we're starting out the critique, if you are showing your designs, you've gotta give us some context. So spend 30 seconds to a minute sort of telling us what this work is about. What are you trying to achieve with this particular screen? What does the user need to be able to do? What are the user's goals? What workflow are we looking at? What state the work is in? Did you just start on this an hour ago and it's highly iterative and you're just kind of shuffling things around? Or is it like more polished? It's been through several rounds of feedback or testing. So it gives us an idea of what to focus on. And I think the most important part when you are asking for design critique is being specific about what aspect you want feedback on. Please, please, please don't put your design on the screen and say, what do you think? Okay, that doesn't help us help you. So examples of a specific aspect that you need feedback on. You could say something like, I'm trying to figure out if I'm trying to figure out if the user flow is understandable. Do you think that users will know where to click, right? Or what I'm really struggling with is this layout. I'm not certain that there's enough room for all of the content, right? So you're focusing the room in on a particular aspect, right? You're helping us. So, I want you to be really specific when you're asking for feedback. It's just good. That goes back to the critical thinking thing, right? The more kind of time and effort and energy you put into like preparing something for critique, usually the better information you're going to get back. All right, for the rest of us who are critiquing your designs, how do we do that? We don't necessarily want to jump quickly into giving our feedback. It might be that there's another level of understanding that we need to get to before we can really help the designer. So ask clarifying questions. If you don't quite understand what they are asking for, ask them to clarify. You're really trying to understand what the designer's mindset is. What are they trying to accomplish here? Another good thing to talk about is like concerns that you have. So I noticed that your navigation icons are extremely small. I'm concerned about that because I'm worried that the click area or the tap area on a mobile device will be too small. All right, so connecting those things. Again, always try to avoid the subjective. I like it, but here's what I don't like. And then receiving feedback. Again, just listen, right? You don't have to start giving defense, arguments, things like that. So just take a bit of time and listen. And then I just like this ASK framework, ASK. Make your feedback actionable, specific, and kind. I think if I were to redo that, I would even put a U at the beginning of that. So understanding, seek understanding, then make your feedback actionable, specific, and kind. Any questions about running the critiques? We'll get practice. And I'm not going to expect the first critique to just be like everyone's perfect. So we'll get practice and we'll sort of retro our critique to say, well, how did that go? Was it helpful? What can we do better next time as a group? Thoughts, questions? Cool. Okay, so hopefully you've looked over the project brief in Canvas. So I'm not going to go through the whole thing. There's quite a bit of information there, but I did just want to bring the prompt back up. I'm not going to read it off the screen, but essentially, what we're after here is a product that can help connect the library to communities, to a specific community, hopefully. Hopefully we can narrow down to a specific community, right? I think you can consider that the library is exploring brand new initiatives to sort of meet the dynamic needs of the community. There's the growth of information, the growth of digital and networking and systems. There's so much information out there. And so we're expecting you to identify areas of opportunity or problems that users have with interacting with the library, and then build a product that will help be a bridge to that community, okay? So this is sort of the framework that we're working in when it comes to the library brief. You've got sort of three main sections or three main chunks. And it's not as clean and neat as saying, chunk 1 is weeks 1 and 2, chunk 2 is weeks 3 and 4, et cetera. they really overlap, and it's more fluid than that. So that's why you have these like kind of cycles that loop back, especially between synthesize, model, and define, and then chunk 3, design, test, and refine. So a lot of times those will kind of move back and forth throughout the end of a UX lifecycle. So you see at the top here, we have goals in phase 1, 2, and 3. This first phase that we're in, so let's just kind of focus on that together. What we're really after now are 3 main things. We're after team alignment. You know, that's internal alignment with yourselves as the design team. We're after understanding business goals, which gives us client alignment. All right. So I'm going to talk a bit more about stakeholders and your stakeholder interviews and how you need to tease out some business goals. Right. Throughout this whole project, a lot of it is about putting constraints on yourself so you can make decisions. And business goals are one way of adding a layer of constraints, right? You're going to need constraints all the time in order to make decisions. Otherwise, you're going to stagnate. When the world is like wide open, you could kind of go here, you could go there, you could go down and up. Like, it's too many decisions to make. So you need to layer on constraints strategically at different points. And the business goals is our first chance to do that. And the stakeholders are the ones that help connect us to those business goals, right? If they're the ones with the paychecks or they're budgeting your project, then the goals that they have are going to be just as important as any, you know, user goals that you uncover later on. And it's our job as designers to connect those user goals to the business goals, okay? The methods that we're using for this first phase, we're already using the research plan, which helps create team alignment, right? That research plan should be a living document for your team. It's going to be updated. You're going to keep track of things on there. So I would just use that as not like a project management tool, but I would use it as a planning tool and then an outcomes tool, right? So here's the plan, here's the outcomes. Let's keep track of those throughout the project. And I'll keep prompting you to update your research plans over the course of the 6 weeks. Now, the business goals that we talked about, we use interviews to uncover those. So that's what you're doing with your stakeholder interviews. All right. And then for the exploratory phase, we're also doing user research, right? Where we're trying to understand what the users need in relation to the scope of the business goals. And then we might also be doing outside research. We might be doing market analysis. We might want to do some demographic analysis. We might want to engage with subject matter experts who will help refine our understanding of the library domain, all right? So I'll leave off the second 2 phases. We'll get into those later on. But yeah, so I think this is hopefully a helpful chart as we go forward. Okay, so the stakeholder interviews that you're working on now. So here's my recommendation for getting the most out of your first round of interviews. If you see the chart at the bottom, I think these are the main chunks of how things usually go in a research project, right? So you're using your stakeholder interviews and you're getting the results of those interviews back. And you're turning those into goals and questions. And I'm gonna break this down for you so you kind of see, because this kind of gets dicey. What are the goals and what are the questions that your stakeholder has? So this is how we get to those business goals up there on the top left, right? So the research goals, the business goals, the questions that stakeholders have, this is what we need to know, all right? Then we're going to take that and we're going to prioritize among those goals. And we're going to have kind of a list of research issues. Then we're going to look at that list of issues and we're going to say, okay, what research method do I need to use to uncover more information about these issues? So user interviews are only one of the methods that we could choose to use, right? There could, like I was saying, there could be domain research, there could be surveys sent out. You could do quantitative data analysis by going into the library. Well, you can't do this, but going into the library database and seeing how people are using their resources internally or their website. So my point is, we're only doing the user interview part, right? But your prioritized issues, you could use several methods of research to try to understand more about those issues, right? So there's a couple of layers there. It's turning the stakeholder interview results into research goals and questions. And then it's taking those goals and questions and turning them into issues. And then it's prioritizing those issues. And then it's creating your user interview questions that address those research issues, right? A research question is not the same thing as a user interview question. Does that statement make sense? Just because you have a research question doesn't mean you turn around and ask the user that same question. You might have to completely change the question in order to do that. So I'm gonna talk more about that in just a second, but identifying stakeholders. Normally in a design job, they're the ones who hold the pen to the paycheck, right? They're the ones who are go, no go on a project. They're usually the ones that you are pitching your concepts to, that you're checking in with during the course of the project to get sign off. So they have some vested interest in making sure that this project is successful, or this project particularly impacts their work, right? In a company, in a tech company, usually product managers can help you prioritize who your stakeholders are going to be, because they could be from all different organizational departments. So marketing, sales, QA, customer support, engineering. It totally depends what department those stakeholders might come from. So here's the big takeaway, I think, for you all, is that these stakeholder interviews are really what creates the raw material for the rest of your research process, okay? And the reason why we want to embrace these goals and the questions from the stakeholders is because we need to know about the business. We need to know what would make this project successful in this particular business. What is it about the brand? What is it about brand recognition that might be important to this? There might be tech constraints, time, scope, and budget. Now, not all of these are applicable to the library brief project that you're doing, because obviously you have an unlimited budget for now. But we are going to prompt you to think about some of these things and make some assumptions. Like I said, you don't have a budget, but we're going to point something out in your designs. If we say, do you know how hard that would be in the real world to do? Right? So that's that idea of reasonable expectations of what you can accomplish. Your stakeholder interviews are also going to help you get understanding about who the users are, right? So make sure you're prioritizing asking about the users of the library to your stakeholders, but always remember that those are statements that need to be validated. I can't tell you the number of times that I've sat down with a stakeholder, asked them about who are the power users, right, for this software. And then I go out and I actually find that it's totally different. They're not the people that they thought they were. So anytime, it should send you out on this sort of fact-finding mission with your stakeholder interview results, all right? Oh, and then, track this stuff on your research plan. When I talk about creating alignment, when you externalize the results of your interviews, your insights onto something like the research plan, and then you get product and engineering to look at that research plan, it's kind of creating alignment and agreement on these are the specific set of issues that are important to this project. And then creating alignment vertically means getting your managers, getting executives at the company, getting the stakeholders themselves in some cases to look at your research plan. And that way you're less likely later on in the project to have a stakeholder come in and said, I never said that, or I never thought that that was a problem, right? So one of the challenges of UX designers, I think, is creating alignment across organizational silos. Especially if you end up in a medium to large company, you are definitely going to find points of conflict between organizational departments. And UX designers are able to sort of traverse across these silos and to sort of magically create alignment on a project. So yeah, it's a fun skill. Okay, so here's the method that we're trying to follow. and just breaking down that chart that I showed you into more granular detail. So here's some examples. After the interview, find those goals and questions. Now, you don't ask the stakeholders, what is your goal for this project? What question? Well, you can ask them what questions you have, but be a smarter researcher than that, right? It's your job to tease out what their goals are, right? It's your job to synthesize the interview transcripts. So as an example here, we have Allison, who's the VP of product development for a company. And from the interview, we decided her high-level goal is to have better conversion of shoppers, more stickiness, people coming back to the site more often. Then we have Eric, who's an interaction designer, and he wants to help people better use the product recommendations, and he wants to convince people to write product recommendations. All right, the second step is to prioritize among the goals and turn them into questions that guide further research. All right, so we've got better conversion of viewers to shoppers. Remember, that was Allison's goal. So that's the issue. So the research question to that issue is, why don't some visitors become shoppers? All right, and if we look back at Eric, the interaction designers, he wanted to get people to write product recommendations. So here the issue is, we want to help people use and write product reviews. And the research questions around that issue are, well, why do people write product reviews? What value do they get from it? All right, and then the user interview questions. So here's an example here of the question: why are so many people abandoning the shopping cart? So a bad interview question would be, why do you add items to the cart and then leave them there? A good interview question is, show me your shopping cart. Tell me about the items you have there. Okay, you want to start getting into the mindset of your users. So this gives you kind of an example of how to turn a research question into an interview question. So it's those kind of things I want you to look for when you are creating your interview scripts. So here's the same slide again with all of the steps to follow for your user interviews. Do you have any thoughts or questions around this? I just want to pause here because it's kind of it's a lot of kind of steps to understand. Make sense?
Quick question,
Yeah.
How should we be thinking about this? So for example, on our team, we're going out and interviewing library managers, and it's I was thinking of them more as subject matter experts, just because obviously it's a hypothetical scenario and we're getting the insights and then applying it to that. So are we also, I guess I'm gathering from what you're saying is we're also supposed to kind of be viewing them as if they were someone we would be solving a problem for?
Yeah, so do that, because it's really good practice. It's really good experience for you to have to get used to considering other departments' goals or considering stakeholders' goals in your research process. I'm telling you, nothing will kill a project faster than a stakeholder. So I would say one of the big points for UX designers is
communicating a lot to, oh, it looks like my headphones died. Sorry, one second. Can you still hear me? Okay.
Now I can. I couldn't for a second.
Let's see. Hold on 1 second. Okay, well, as long as you can still hear me, I'm just going to keep talking.
We can now see and hear you.
Okay, perfect.
At least I can. Cool.
So yes, to go back to your question for a second, I want you to be strategic about who you consider to be stakeholders. Usually those are going to be people higher up in the library. So if you can get to someone who can talk to the business objectives of the library, that would be great. Not all of you will be able to do that. So even if you just had one person per team that could act as your stakeholder, your proxy stakeholder, I think it's going to be really good experience for you. Okay. The subject matter experts, you could consider as like soft stakeholders. Does that make sense? Like you would make a clear separation in a real project between a subject matter expert and a stakeholder. But I do think that for this project, it would be okay to say, oh, we had two different subject matter experts say that this, right? Then I think you can.
Keeps telling me my default microphone has changed. Yeah, then you can prioritize among those identified issues and then turn those into user interviews, okay? Yeah, the main takeaway I want you to get here is that all of this research has to go through this sort of transformational process before it's valuable for you to go talk to users. That's one of the hardest things for early UX designers to understand, that they can't just go out and start asking questions. You have to get really strategic about what questions you ask and how you ask them. So that's why I'm putting a lot of time into talking about this sort of transformation of the stakeholder interviews to the user interviews, okay? All right, great. So I just want to talk for just a moment and give you a little bit of ammunition when you go into interviewing. There's some good details on Canvas, but these are probably like my top things that I would say to a designer who has never done user interviews or has done stakeholder interviews. So use that script because don't trust yourself to wing it, right? And when I say use the script, I mean read your questions verbatim. If you find yourself sort of making up the questions or changing the way you phrase the question, it means you didn't put enough time into writing the question down. You didn't put enough thought and time into writing the question on your user interview script. So I want you to be really, really strict on yourself about reading the question verbatim to start out with. You won't always have to do that, but most of us are not good at just sort of just jumping into things off the spot, right? Make sure you're using the same introduction, the same set of role-specific questions, because if you change it up from user to user, you are kind of biasing the interview. You're giving them different information from participant to participant, and you don't want that. You want, as much as possible, you want a common baseline, right, of your of using the user interview script. The second thing I would encourage you to do is, as much as possible, use restraint in how you engage your participants. So ease them into the interview. Being interviewed is not a natural feeling thing. So give them a softball question at the beginning, not a question where you have to ask follow-up questions or anything like that. Like, just ask them about, how their day's going, what was the most interesting thing that they've done today. Just a softball question, and you don't have to immediately ask follow-up questions, but ease them into the conversation. When you're into the kind of heavy questions in interviews, make sure that you are just giving them space. People think in paragraphs, not in sentences. So if you just pause, it's an old interviewer trick. If you pause long enough to where it's almost uncomfortable, a lot of times they will continue saying something related to the question that you asked, right? So if it gives them a bit of time to process. So use silence strategically. That's like one of the hardest things to do when you're interviewing, is just letting it be silent for a minute and seeing what happens. Often, and I there's a challenge for me a lot, I'll fall back into sort of a conversational style where it just feels very informal and like we might have a good repose together. But a good interview is actually not really a conversation. Good interview, you're there to learn, right? So kind of get yourself into that curious mindset where you're elevating the user to like teacher. It's almost like that kind of master-apprentice relationship, right? And so if you think about it, you might not enter into a very informal conversational style with someone that you're really trying to learn from. You're being strategic with your time and your approach. And then giving them time to think. It just goes back to that strategic silence and space. You know, give them time to think about their answers. Prompting people with follow-up questions. I think one of the best ways is just ask them to show you an example of what they're talking about. It doesn't always have to be just them talking at you, right? If they start telling you about a method of data entry that they do every single day or for 2 hours a day, ask them to show you, like observe, you know, get them to teach you. Several times when I've done user interviews, I've actually asked if I can do the thing that they're trying to show me. Now that might not work at the library. They're not going to let you jump on the computers. But as an interviewing skill, if I say, okay, let me create an advertising campaign with this software, and I'm going to go through the same struggle that the users are going through to kind of get that like tacit experience, okay? And then if it's not appropriate to ask for an example, ask them to tell you a story. If they're expressing frustration about, the library book return system, say, tell me about a time when that was really frustrating. You know, get them to anchor it in a story, because that's where you really find, I think, interesting nuggets from your user interviews, is when you can get them telling stories, right? It engages this sort of primal thing in people's mind, I think, when they start telling stories, because it's how we make sense of our world around us. It's how we make sense of our context and our own behavior is in story form. So if you can get users telling you stories, then I think you're in a really good place for the interview. And it feels very natural and nice for them to tell you stories, okay? Okay, so that's the bulk of the information that I have for you today. I want to talk about just quickly what's coming up on Wednesday. So you've got your stakeholder interviews. Here are the 3 things that we'd like. Your interview guide. And again, put that guide on the research plan. You don't have to turn it in as a separate document. Just put it on your research plan. The questions that you were asking your stakeholders or your subject matter experts. Give us a summary of insights. You know, tell us about the big takeaways from your interview. And then the list of stakeholder goals, questions, issues, that transformational process I talked about, I'd like to see a separate list of those things. Okay, so the questions that you went in to ask, your insights from the interview, and then that transformational layer of saying, here's the goals and questions from this interview, okay? Then of course on Sunday you have your user interviews. For that, of course, we want the user interview guide. Again, track that on your research plan, and the insights, you can put that on your research plan as well. There is an assignment in there about contextual inquiry. So this is essentially a user interview, but in the particular space of the user, right? So the contextual inquiry, you're going in a little bit more, it's a little more informal. You're there more to observe and ask reactionary questions than like a proactive probe for the user interview. So the whole point is that you're there to learn and observe. So I'm challenging you to find at least one user where you can go to their space, right? And you can observe them doing a task that's important to the research. Maybe it's a study task, like, you know, I'm gonna observe and ask questions for 30 minutes while you write this research report or whatever it is, okay? And then of course the Friday reflection. All right, so that's it for the orientation and the interview portion. You know, we'll talk and discuss for a moment if you have any questions, and then we'll look at your research plans, and then we'll be done. A lot of information, right? It's a lot to think about. Yeah.
Well,
All right.
I have a question that was kind of like a more general question, just about like the WeWork thing, how we were able to like sign up to use that for going into study or whichever. So if we want to use a hot desk, can we just go in whenever? I was getting a little confused because I got like emails about like booking rooms and stuff like that. I understand that, and I understand like the credit thing, but if we just want to go in and do some of our readings at a hot desk, can we just walk in?
Yes, my understanding is that it's only booking a room, right? A private room that goes towards your credits. So you should have access to the common space there. And there's like booths and there's like telephone booth rooms that you can just go in and shut the door. They're very small. So if you're claustrophobic, don't use those. But yes, you have access to the space. If you and your team want to like meet in a private room and you both use your individual credits up, let me know, because I can probably get you access for a couple of hours or something downtown. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Yes, I was just like confused if we also had to reserve just a hot desk or something, but okay.
Yep. Any other questions? Cool. All right, so which team would be willing to go first and just walk us through your research plan? There's only 2 teams. You're going to have to go sometime, so.
All right. I guess, yeah, we'll go. Let me just move real fast. All right. Sorry. Gotta go back to the roof. All right. All right. Let's see. Can you guys see it?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So we are, I guess we named ourselves D3 because we have 3 people. Designs got the word or the letter D in it. So quick and simple. It's myself, Sergi, and Janie. Do you want me to read it or just quickly like?
Yeah, you can skip the project context.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to hear about the other different areas though.
Okay.
Objectives, your audience.
Did you want to read the objectives, Sergi?
Yeah, sure. I think the first thing that we wanted to do is we wanted to understand the library's vision and goals for creating a digitally inclusive community. So it goes back to finding out their restraints, their budget, how viable and feasible their vision is from our research perspective. And then from there, we wanted to find out the demographic, the target demographic for the project. So again, after getting insight from our SMEs and stakeholders, we would then do our research to figure out if that's truly the case. And as well, with we also wanted to find out the community, the needs of the community from the library's perspective, and ways they are trying to meet them, ways they are not meeting them, and then just identifying areas where the library hasn't provided a good solution for fulfilling those needs. So that's kind of some of the objectives that we're looking at.
All right. I guess for audience, so the from the design brief, we just kind of assume that it's going to be creating something. Oh, oops. Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So creating a digital product to establish a more digitally inclusive community. Yeah, the subjects of our research are local community members that the library serves, accounting for diversity in age, location, income, frequency of use, cultural background, and then we're going to try to identify and define a more specific subset of user groups based on forthcoming stakeholder and SME interviews. And then since we all live in different locations, so Janie's out in Baltimore on the East Coast, Sergi's in Chicago with you guys, and I'm in San Diego on the West Coast. Makes it fun to coordinate, you know, time schedules, but it's worked out so far. Yeah, and then we'll conduct user interviews with live SMEs, patrons. Or I had a question about that. So for the user interviews, is that what we're meant to do? Is like try to get user interviews from a random library patron, or is it somebody that we might, because we're not allowed to use friends, right? So
Yeah, so I saw that if you scroll back up to your audience, your user interviews should come from your identified audience, from your stakeholders, right? So based on your stakeholder interview results, this is the audience that we want to start to shine a spotlight on. Okay, so going back to like the slide about issue prioritization, right? Your job is not to take every single thing that the stakeholder said and then go and try to figure out, you know, where the problems are. Your job is to sort of prioritize an opportunity. Like, here's where we think that, you know, we want to shine a light and dig into a further area to see what we can find. Does that make sense? Like you because you're going to have like different opinions and things, designers often feel like they're not in a position to kind of make those decisions. But you do have to sort of prioritize among all of the identified issues and say, well, here's where we can best put our resources, and your audience will be part of that. That's
Okay.
where your user interviews should come from.
Right. Okay. Janie?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, we put in the different methods. Yeah, at this point, I think that one thing we want to think about is like how we're scheduling it and kind of pinning it down to what stages they're going to happen at, because I wasn't particularly clear on that, and now I'm looking at it and it's kind of in different chunks. But yeah, so hoping to do exploratory research, competitive analysis, the SME interviews, which we're doing for Wednesday, the user interviews, and then hopefully be able to do some sort of survey, online survey, so we could analyze data more quantitatively, depending on how many responses we get back on that. And then we were thinking of doing the ethnographic field study of just going into the library, observing what people are using, what's going on. Yeah.
One thing I did want to point out here, where your user interview bullet point.
Yep.
So you don't know yet whether a user being a frequent user or a non-user or infrequent user is actually important to your research, right? So yeah, but you know, wait until you've done a little bit of stakeholder synthesis to determine whether or not, you know, we want to engage people who you know, are using the library all the time, but there's this like major pain point that's keeping them from engaging further, or whether we're going after particular users who are using some other competing resource to get their work done.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think at this point, because like I also wrote up the part about audience, I think at this point it just felt like I wasn't exactly sure what to put down at this point because we haven't gleaned the insights yet. So but that makes a lot of sense, yeah, because we don't really know yet what kind of user
be.
Yeah. Do you know what I usually do when I kind of list out the methods? Again, because the research plan is not just for your team, right? It's to let other people into the black box of your research a little bit. So that transparency, I'll usually put a little bit down about what the method is for. So we're going to conduct, 5 to 10 in-person interviews. Well, I don't know if you want to say in-person because sometimes you may have to do remote interviews. But we're conducting these user interviews to better understand the behaviors and motivations of a specific group of library goers. And that can be enough to start out with, but it gives people who are peering into your research world a sense of hey, why are we taking a week and a half and why have we budgeted, $4,000 to do user interviews with travel costs, et cetera, et cetera.
Got it. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. And then along the lines of what we're just saying right now, I guess this was a little more aspirational, but in speaking with you now, it's kind of clarifying that we might not know yet if we're breaking out users in this way. But that was kind of going off of one of the exemplars that was featured in one of the movie or the video clips.
Yep.
Oh yeah, so that's I guess we're gonna build out our schedule a little bit more because we haven't had a chance to really plan it out specifically yet. So that's kind of just, that's just what we put into the research plan right there. And then these are gonna be our outcomes and deliverables. But is this something that we also aren't? Is that something that we haven't determined yet, or is this pretty common deliverables for?
Yeah, so it's a good time right now to just have a quick discussion about the difference between a thinking tool or a thinking deliverable and a communicating deliverable, because they're usually different things. So
yeah.
You might not deliver a task flow or a sketch to an end client.
Right. Okay, that makes sense.
Right, but I think for these purposes, it's probably okay to just keep track of them here.
Yeah.
So because you will use that, what's more important is the outcome. What those deliverables taught you are going to be the important things to put on your research plans. So, we can, summary of our card sort, 9 out of 10 users express that this term should be used for the navigation and not this term. So those kind of outcomes are what's important to track.
Right. So if it was a stakeholder facing research plan, we wouldn't write card sort. This is just more for like you said, internal team, so we can keep a track of it right here. Yeah. Was this document supposed to be stakeholder facing?
So usually stakeholders are not going to look at this research plan.
Right.
They might take an initial look at it. So you might just scaffold it out very lightly, kind of like what you're doing here. And you may group certain things, right? Instead of explicitly saying we're going to do a card sort and task flows in a sitemap, you might say we're going to deliver wireframes and it's going to take, 4 weeks. And that might be it. And then, the thinking tools that it takes to actually get to those wireframes, but you might not list them out specifically.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then our appendix at the bottom is, it's a sample of the interview script that we came up with. Went through, do you want to talk about that, Janie? If it's to you up with the...
Yeah, sure. I think we've all so we as a team met earlier today and we're talking about even already how our thinking is kind of evolving. And so this was sort of a first pass at it for the Sunday night deadline. And then I think as we're moving in towards actually executing the stakeholder SME interviews, we're thinking, obviously we've pulled them out and made it its own thing now. And we're thinking about how are we adjusting it so that it's more tailored to that interviewee audience in particular. And I I think some of the things that have been said on this call are really helpful just in clarifying like what we're trying to get out of the stakeholder SME. So I anticipate we might even add those in too.
Yeah, I'm so glad you called that out because really going in with an objective, knowing what you want to get out of something like an interview makes all the difference in the world because then you're just sort of flailing to get whatever information seems important to you in the moment for these interviews. Whereas if you're more strategic going in, you'll get better data back.
Yep.
Yep. Love it.
If we have some time in the end, would it be possible for us to take a look at our SME's interview questions that we have put together on a separate page?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, let's take about 5 more minutes and then I want to look at the other teams.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of the end of it right there. These are just like the questions that we kind of initially came up with.
So Sergey, I'm sorry, you wanted to look at stakeholder questions?
Yeah, we have a separate document for that we've been adjusting as we go. Since we started our interviews today, we thought maybe it'd be good to get some feedback on what we have currently. So I'm not sure if you would like to do that now or wait till we are done with the second team.
Gotcha. Okay. I think we have time right now. We'll just take 3 or 4 more minutes and look over the stakeholder questions.
Okay.
Do you want to open that document?
Who are you going to open it?
It's this one, right?
Did you want to share yours, Sergi?
Yeah.
I know we had done some, or you had written out the objectives that I think were really great.
All right, yeah.
What were you referring
Yeah,
to?
why don't you take the reins here?
Yeah, I think just based on the readings that we've done, we thought, sorry, I don't know, I'm calling in from my phone, so you guys, I can't put in my screen, because every time I talk, it goes to my phone instead of this, my video chat. So maybe, Lou, if you could have it open, that'd be great.
Oh, yeah, here, let me see.
Sorry about that. So as we were gathering questions and trying to formulate exactly how our interview should be, I think we all came to a point where we realized that we need to have clear objectives in terms of what exactly we want to achieve from these interviews, even though, you know, some of the questions might be missed when we're going to be interviewing individually. So I think first thing we ended up doing is just kind of putting in the objectives in the beginning to kind of hone in them as we're going through. And then later on, Ginny did a great job of just putting together an introduction for us to kind of think about how we could get into the conversation or interview with the SME. So you scroll down a little bit. Yeah, so then I think the 2 big, I guess, chunks that we're focusing on is the general questions. First, understanding who the SME is, their involvement with the library, perhaps some of their involvement with the community, what exactly they use at work for completing their work, and then the following questions we have are more specific towards the actual research that we're trying to do. So I think the challenge, I'm not sure, we haven't heard from Vu yet how his interview went and what he was able to cover, but I think for me, as I'm thinking through some of these questions, both the general questions and the specific questions, I'm worried that it's possible that we have too many questions for doing a 15-minute interview. And since we don't know the stakeholders, I definitely want to be respectful of their time, so I don't want to go overboard with our time. So we'd love to hear your feedback on just the questioning, if we should maybe combine some of these questions, get rid of them.
So your general questions, I feel, are extremely focused on the stakeholders' personal experience. You know, what tools are they using to do their job? So for the stakeholders, you're much less interested in, you know, what it is that they're doing day to day, and more getting them to focus in on the users of the library, right? So they are going to provide you the guidance that will send you out on a fact-finding mission, I guess, in order to interview users. So the question, like, are you involved in community groups, activities outside of work? Like, you could probably fill 5 minutes just them answering that question, but I don't see it as very valuable to the research project.
Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah, I feel like you could combine the information about their background and their role into like one introductory question. Yeah, so that's my feedback on the general question portion. Also, I mean, I guess I'd challenge you to say 15 minutes is really short for an interview. I totally get the desire to be respectful of their time. But actually, Dina, you always have something really great to say when you talk about engaging people for these interviews. Do you mind just popping in and giving your like little coaching spiel about that?
Sure. So my pep talk that I try to give for this is that I used to be an organizer, a lot of like knocking on people's doors and forcibly informing them about stuff. And one thing that helped me get out of my head about it and like helped bring this into my comfort zone was to remember that I'm not asking anyone to do me a favor. I'm coming and telling them information that they need to know. Like, this is stuff that affects them, that they want to be informed about, even if they're cranky about it. Like, I'm doing something that's for their own good. Similarly, when you do these interviews, the only way that cool products get made is that the people making them talk to the users of the products and find out what they need. Like, you aren't your user. An app that you enjoy isn't necessarily going to be helpful for anybody but you. So this doesn't apply quite as directly, since this is kind of a test project that isn't really going to get developed, but that's something that helps me with user interviews, just to remember that, like, hey, do you like cool apps? If you like cool apps, someone's got to do these interviews or we won't have any cool apps. And even since this is a project for school, like, people generally like it when someone cares about their opinions, you know? Like, folks have 15 minutes or half an hour for you. People like being asked things. Like, people take surveys for fun. There are all kinds of websites like Mechanical Turk and stuff where, you know, you get paid 30 cents for doing a survey. Just people kind of like to be heard. It's nice when you tell them, like, your opinion is important to me. I'm trying to learn more about this domain and your insights will help me to do that. For the most part, folks will be nice to you. And even the ones that don't want to talk, like 99% of the time will just be like, no, thanks. And that's it. So I know it feels a little scary, but it's really not that bad once you get into it.
Yeah, I know.
Thanks for the input.
Saying 30 minutes in an email or, you know, in an introduction feels like intimidating, but I feel like you're going to get better. You're going to get better interviews if you can kind of take the time to ease them into the conversation, give them some time to start telling stories. And if you get a really good interview participant and you're like trying to watch the clock and be like, well, I want to, you know, respect your time and they're going to like shut down. So they will probably enjoy the interview more if you can get them to that place where, you know, they're really invested in the conversation. And that takes more than, you know, 5 minutes to kind of get into that rhythm. So I'd love for you, it'll be a little easier with users probably. It's a little harder with the stakeholders, but try to get at least one stakeholder interview where, you know, you're talking for 30 minutes. Cool. All right, let's go ahead and see the other team's research plan. Make sure, give a fair amount of time.
Oh, one more tiny note. I know a couple librarians, and we've been working on this brief for a while. Librarians are passionate about being librarians. Like, they went and got a master's to be librarians. So they will probably be very excited to talk to you all about library stuff and just nerd out at you about their ideal picture of a library. So, like, stakeholder wise, you shouldn't have any trouble because librarians tend to be real geeked out about their jobs.
Yeah.
That's what I interviewed someone at the branch manager at the Bucktown Chicago Library, and it's election day today, so they were a little bit more on the can you come back and well, what is this about, and oh, I've gotten these questions before. Like I feel like because they're asking me the same questions, so maybe people are going to the same library, I don't know. But she was really helpful, and but it did kind of take some oh, I'm just a student and I'm trying to learn as much as I can from you and try to learn as much as, your services and programs and your perspective on things. But it was initially a little bit uncomfortable, but it is good to get out of that zone.
Yeah, today is an intense day for people who work in public spaces.
Yeah, right.
Hopefully they'll be a little more relaxed tomorrow.
Yeah. So, Sarah, do you want me to start, and then, or do
Do you want to share the screen, or should I?
Do you have it up?
I do have it up. Let me see if I can.
I think this meeting's been really helpful, and it's good to know that, this is a living document, so there probably will be some
Does that work?
adjustments. Yeah.
Okay. So I guess right off the bat, our user research plan seems a lot more narrow than the other teams. I'm not sure if we were going about that correctly, but we base this off of kind of what we expected to get from, how would I word this correctly? Well, I guess we can just start from the beginning and then you'll understand where I'm coming from. But so this is our little intro. Do you want to read the intro or?
Yeah, so basically discover how we can enhance the community engagement through libraries is the same context. That's basically what we're, the focus is on. But the objectives, as you go down to the, this is kind of our objectives: users' reasoning for visiting their local library, the services, programs, and offerings users the local library provides, what are users actually using, what programs are they using, any improvements, frustrations, obstacles, what methods are they using right now to inform and communicate with the user. So those are kind of our objectives. In terms of audience, that is something that we should go back in just because we don't know just yet. And I think even with this interview from today, we both probably got more information from how it's going to be narrowed down. So yeah.
Okay, so for locations for where we thought we would be, this is what we put down for where we thought we would be actually holding interviews for for users and stakeholders. So Deanna gave us some feedback saying that we may have got a little broad by getting budgetary people involved, but we thought that was important because kind of making those constraints to begin with when you're doing your starting your project and research. So we said public libraries because what's the best place to find a library user? And then we said online for things like surveys, questionnaires. If you're not able to meet with someone in public, it's easier to find someone online to communicate with.
Yeah, just to be clear, it's not that I think you should completely ignore budget constraints if that's something you're interested in. I think you maybe just were underestimating how much time and effort it would take you to actually get someone on city council to sit down with you, especially because, as you mentioned, the election is today. So you're probably not going to get someone to explain how the city budget works, who works in the city budget, in enough time for it to be useful for you.
Yeah, I think we went a little broad, and we're just thinking in general who we would want, not in practice for the project, but we were just going very I guess, wide with it, because I did not expect us to actually meet with a City Hall member, that's for sure.
Okay, cool.
I did also want to say here really quickly, the word audience is a bit vague. So let's put a little definition around what I mean when I say a particular audience or a target audience. So you can define audience in a lot of different ways, right? You could define it by demographics. You could define it by community. You could define it by role, by job. So what I'm wanting you to sort of be primed to listen out for your stakeholder interviews is an audience like, say, entrepreneurs who are just starting their first startup. Like, that is a particular audience group who has specific needs that I can create a solution to solve for those needs. So if it was entrepreneurs, it would be, we don't have a big budget for our first startup, and we need meeting space. We need a place where we can create, or we can host clients, those kind of things, right? So entrepreneurs will have specific needs that the library can help fill. Mm-hmm. Right? And entrepreneurs could be anybody from 2 to 99 years old. So I'm less concerned about strictly demographic breakdowns, although that could be important, as I am in more thinking of an audience as a particular people set. And that can be defined in several different ways. So that's what you want to listen out for in your stakeholder interviews.
Okay, so in this case, at least, the audience would be particular, like specific types of users that are getting some benefit out of coming to the library. That
are either getting a benefit out of the library now, or could be getting a benefit, but they're using some other service that the library has not yet addressed that need, right? Okay. Keep going through. Let's see your methods.
So our methods, we kind of broke it up into qualitative and quantitative. So for qualitative, we have the competitive analysis to kind of see what's out there already, get some ideas, see what weaknesses are there, what opportunities we can take advantage of or add, what we like, what can be mimicked. And then another is the stakeholder interview. And then we listed what we would expect the information we would expect to get from a stakeholder interview, budget stuff, technical constraints, and then more things like ideological drivers and their perception of users. Subject matter expert interviews, so they can give us more information, their perspective on users, the library community, and then the library services and their offerings, and then I guess just more information on library trends. I'm sure that's a thing. I don't know any library trends per se, but then we also have user interviews and questionnaires for people to do online. Do you want to do the quantitative? Oh, sorry.
One thing I wanted to mention about the competitive analysis, make sure that your analysis is scoped to your users, meaning you're not necessarily just looking at every competitor that the library has in general. Like, I'm just gonna keep going with my example of the entrepreneurs. So in that example, you're looking at who are the competitors for the entrepreneurial services that they're using, not just every competitor of the library. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay.
That's why it comes after the user interviews, because it's more properly defined and scoped by that point.
So would like that be, for instance, like I actually am not even educated on like the State Farm places where they like learn how, or like the free resources that people use for like community meeting spaces, like things like that.
Yeah, if that's what you've started to uncover from your stakeholders, and that's what you want to prioritize going after a group of or an audience that needs meeting space, then definitely that would be a competitor.
Okay.
Competitor is not necessarily the right
Yeah, right.
term. It's because it comes from market research, right? That's so that it just inherited that, but alternative resource would be a nicer.
Yeah. Okay, the schedule's really not something that
We weren't quite sure like how realistic we were supposed to be because we kind of have a schedule for how to do things according to the designation plan.
yeah.
So just like an idea.
Yeah. Right, and then the outcomes were similar, but we didn't do all of the outcomes. It was competitive analysis report, the quantitative data, infographics, the personas, and then that problem statement. Yeah. And then the appendix is just some of the questions that we were thinking of asking our users, like why do you visit the library? What service programs do you use? You know, how long are your visits? Do you interact with other people at the library? Things like that, just to kind of understand if there's any sort of community already that's happening, you know?
So I want to talk for just a second about like this question, why do you visit the library? If you ask a user that question, you're going to get pretty generic answers most of the time. So I want to start challenging you to think about other questions you could ask so that you can be the one to define why users go to the library, right? So that's why I talk about the power of storytelling. If you can get them to tell you a story about their last visit to the library, there's a lot, it's more rich, right? The data you're getting back is more rich from that interview. And then you do the UX synthesis, you do the critical thinking to say, here are a group of reasons why our users visit the library. They didn't just tell it to you. You're talking about actual behaviors versus just self-reported thoughts.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Any other feedback or anything you want to talk about for your research plan?
I think we're gonna just make a couple of adjustments, and then yeah, like I said, we did our SME interviews today, so yeah, we'll see.
Great. Yeah. All right, good. And you know, we often find that the user interviews might kind of trail into the next week a little bit. So it's okay, like you can turn in again, the point is not just turning in the assignments, you know, it's the process that you're going through. So you could turn in what you have for the assignment. And if you're still interviewing another user, then that's totally okay beginning next week, as long as you recognize that it's pretty easy to get behind in a boot camp. So, you know, I talk about reaching that like decision threshold. Try to understand what your own team's threshold is for being able to make a decision and move on to the next part.
Okay. Awesome.
Okay, any general questions or anything else you want to talk about? Because we are right at time. Okay, cool. Well, we're on Slack, so don't hesitate to reach out. I'll see you again on Friday, but I look forward to seeing the SME interview results and seeing how that transforms into like the issues that you're going to focus on for your user interviews. So we'll be looking out for that layer. All right.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day. Bye.
Hey, y'all. Nice to meet you.
All right, thank you.